The Kentucky Derby is always the first Saturday in May, and with that being said, we're now only a few months from the 2018 version of the race. We're still early in the process of this year's Kentucky Derby. It's always difficult with the Derby because, they're the 3-year-olds. And even at the Derby, many of the horses have not run in too many races, but certainly at this point in the calendar in the racing season, a lot of the horses do not have that many starts. Some of the horses that will race in the Derby uh, may only have like one start. But it's never. I don't think it's ever too early to discuss the Derby and preview some of the horses and some of the storylines going into the race, because I think from both the wagering perspective and also just if you're just a fan of horse racing and maybe not are planning the wager on the race, I think if you just 2 days before the Derby or like the week before the Derby, if that's when you get into it, it's very difficult to consume everything that's going on, because there's 20 horses most likely that are in the race. There's different trainers, there's jockeys, there's so many things that are going on. So if you start following it now, it's much easier to kind of have everything neat and orderly. And then when you do wager on the race, if you do, I've always found that if you just kind of, like I said, 2 days before the race, try to scramble and say, okay, who are the good horses here? That's very difficult. I'm not saying you can't make correct predictions, but that's, for me at least, that's difficult. I'm much more likely to kind of correctly predict different outcomes if I have been following it, even if just a little bit from afar. And even totally forgetting about wagering, it's also a lot of fun to just track these horses because, like I said, there's so many. The way that the Kentucky Derby is scheduled now is it's a point system to get into the race. So, you can't just have great pedigree and show up a few weeks and say, okay, he's in. That's not how it works. You have to run in these races. And there's a lot of them. This winter going into the spring, and they're all over the country. And then there's also a non-American foreign leaderboard as well, that is worth paying attention to. So with all of that being said, I'm just going to take a look at some of the storylines going into it and take a look at 4 horses in particular that I'm looking at. I think right now there's 2 that I would say are maybe not front runners, but have separated themselves a little bit from the field. But even those 2, I think that there's so many other ones that are going to emerge. I'm not sure that those 2 that are the favorites now are going to be the favorites race day or even, the week leading up. Potentially. So I'm going to look at those 2 and then 2 more and then a couple of other things, and then we'll kind of follow it from now until Derby Day. So starting off, I've got to start with Bolt d'Oro. A lot of people have probably heard of this horse. He was kind of the main storyline or dominant factor in the 2-year-old season last year. And then he went into the Breeders' Cup Juvenile out in Del Mar, California as the big favorite. And he finished 3rd in that race. So he's kind of, backtracked a little bit in terms of his hype. I do really like this horse, though. I want to say that. And there's a couple of different angles you can look at him. The first thing is you can look at his 2-year-old season when he was winning, very dominant. So if he can regain that form, I do think he'll go into the Derby as the clear favorite. But we'll see if he can regain that form. But a couple of other things. His trainer, Mick Reese, is not the most famous trainer. So maybe that's a negative on him. I'm not sure. But that is something to keep in mind, that the trainer of these horses, that's a big factor if you look at past Derby winners and just not just the Derby, but all of these big races. you're much more likely to see a winner come from a trainer with pedigree of winning big races. So that is something to keep an eye out just moving forward. And then if we look at that Breeders' Cup Juvenile, I would recommend that if you are want to learn about Bolt Thor, go back and watch that race. You can find it online very easily. And he finished third. And the thing is, though, I don't mind that performance. That's just my perspective. Like, sometimes I like to see any athlete, you know, in this case, the horse, go through adversity. And how do you respond to that? And he didn't run his race in, you know, his desired race in that, in the juvenile. But for him to finish third, that's impressive for me, because that tells me, like, okay, things might not go his way, but he's still done a fight and call and, you know, do his best. And that's important, because when you are fighting and calling, like I said, and you're working hard, even when things don't go your way, when they do go your way, that effort is going to make you give you such an advantage over your competitors. And that's what I do like about him. And so I'm not, you know, that third, you might think, third in the juvenile, that's not great. But it's really, in some respects, I don't mind it, and I actually kind of like it, because you have to go back and watch that race and kind of see how it unfolded. And so I just really want to see how he does, like I said, in these Derby prep races on the, I think it's called the Road to the Kentucky Derby. And you just have to, you know, and then if he starts winning again, then, you know, then that juvenile performance maybe even look better and better. So those are, you know, he's got a lot of positives, Bolt Thor does, but then he does have these negatives that are, you know, you need to look at. So moving on to the second of the two favorites, I think right now, would be Good Magic. And Good Magic is the horse that won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Awesome, he ran an awesome race, good looking horse. And the important thing to note with him is he's trained by Chad Brown. So Chad Brown has been one of the most successful trainers in America the past couple of years. No question about that. But he's only won one Triple Crown race. He won the Preakness last year. Cloud Computing was the horse. And he's, you know, so obviously he's never won the Derby. So that is something to keep in mind. One thing I've been wanting to say is the fact that Chad Brown has never won the Derby, or one of his horses has never won the Derby, in a weird way, I actually think that that's kind of a positive if you're looking at one of Chad Brown's horses. And let me explain why I think that is. Because I think, like, he really, really wants to win the Derby to, like, really cement his status as one of the best trainers. Not that he isn't, but, like, if Chad Brown wins the Kentucky Derby, then, like, you know, that's a major statement. So I think he's going to put a lot into whatever horse he feels like gives him the best chance to win the Derby. I think he's really going to do everything in terms of scheduling and workouts to gear that horse up for the Derby. And so I think Good Magic is, you've really got to keep eyes on this horse right now. And, you know, there's the combination of him being very talented along with being trained by Chad Brown. You know, that gives me a lot of confidence that this horse is going to be a major factor in these upcoming races and then on Derby Day for sure. So I'm keeping very close eyes on Good Magic. And that's a cool name too, Good Magic. Okay, next horse. So those are the two favorites, Bolt Thor and Good Magic. For now, those are the two favorites. Two more I wanted to look at, and then a few more things on this preview show. Third horse I want to look at is Copper Bullet. So I really like Copper Bullet. He's trained by Steve Asmussen. Copper Bullet last year ran a bunch of really good races. I loved the way he was running. And then he did have this injury. There wasn't like too much information on his injury, so there's not really much I can say about that. But most people say like it's relatively minor. So it's not one of these where he's going to either have to be retired or he's going to be out for like a year or so. I think he's going to be good to go this, again, winter and the spring. And then if he's good enough, run the Derby. A couple things I would say about him. One, I just really like this horse, the way he ran in those races last year as a 2-year-old. And then the other thing is like the Steve Asmussen factor. You know, obviously one of the biggest stories in horse racing last year was the success of Gunrunner throughout the summer. And then, of course, coming together at the Breeders' Cup Classic Gunrunner ran an awesome race and won the Breeders' Cup Classic. And of course, Copper Bolt is not Gunrunner. He is trained by Steve Asmussen, who is the trainer of Gunrunner. And more to the point, not only can that sometimes, create confidence, in that barn, but I also think, like, to win the Breeders' Cup Classic and then the Kentucky Derby, or even, in either order, the Derby and then the Classic, or the Classic and then the Derby, that's an incredible accomplishment for a trainer. So I really think, like, that just kind of creates some mojo for Copper Bullet, or any other horse for that matter that's trained by Asmussen heading into this year's Derby. I do think that is a really intriguing factor to look at. So I'm keeping a close eye on Copper Bullet. I want to see how he recovers from that injury. And then if he goes back to that form he showed last year, I think he could be the favorite going into the Derby. So I'm keeping a close eye on Copper Bullet. And then the fourth horse that I'm just going to mention really quick is Free Drop Billy. So Free Drop Billy was running really well. He won a race right before the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. I forget what the race is called, but it was a nice field. And then he ran the Juvenile, and he just did not run a good race in the Juvenile. He finished 9th and really was just never in it. Just bad race. But he looked really good before that. He's another one of these horses that is just, a good-looking horse. So I don't think you can just forget about him based on one bad performance. So if he does rebound, the positive to him, he's trained by Dale Romans, who's a really good trainer, and he is the son of Union Rags, who was a great horse himself, and also has sired a bunch of other really good horses that have had success. So I'm keeping an eye on Free Drop Billy. I don't want to just forget about him because of that one bad performance in the Juvenile. So those are the 4 horses I wanted to look at. And then one other thing, or a couple of other small things. Along with those horses, of course, I'm going to be keeping an eye on horses that are trained by, some of the big trainers like Todd Pletcher and Bob Baffert. If you just look at the recent history of the Kentucky Derby, it'd be foolish to ignore those 2 in particular, and there's a couple of other trainers they have to keep an eye on. I don't think there's one horse by either of those 2 trainers that have stood out. If there was, I'd mention it, but I looked, I couldn't find one where I had the confidence to say, yeah, I'm gonna ride with him from moving forward. So, but I did just want to mention that factor, the Pletcher, Baffert, that is worth definitely keeping an eye on. So we'll just kind of see how that factor. So there were those 4 horses and the 2 trainers, and then there's just so many races that are coming up. You probably won't even be able to follow them because they really come fast and furious. I think the final one is either 2 or 3 weeks before the Derby. And then, of course, then the Derby field kind of comes together, and then there's the draw. So this is definitely exciting. Again, it's still early. I do want to emphasize that there's plenty of time for so many things to change. But we do have the potential for a good field. There's so many things to love about the Kentucky Derby. There's a million things to love. One of my favorite things about it, though, is the 20-horse field. I just love that because it, not only from a betting perspective, of course, that makes betting, intriguing because you can get some, interesting odds there. But it's just fun to watch because, like, the horses have to deal with each other. And that's just, for me at least, that's just fun to watch. So anyway, thank you for watching this video and enjoy the races coming up. And we'll have a lot to talk about in the next couple of weeks and months.